Hi, I'm Katherine Yang, and welcome to my course reflection on HCDE313 Introduction to User Research. This was my first formal experience with user research. I was in a directed research group before I got into HCDE and had conducted interviews and analyzed data from those interviews, but it was very much so unspoken practices. This was a good experience to analyze why we do things the way we do in research and what to look out for. After this class, I redefined my definition of user research. User research is a means to holistically looking at the world. It is what sets the actual design off in the right direction and sets the tone. Part of the most intriguing parts is being able to hear people's stories, to know that I'm actually allowing people a platform to speak of their own experiences and not imposing my own bubble on them. This class was able to start us off slow and build us up as our projects went on. I created this new definition by conducting field studies, interviews, and surveys throughout the year. We started out the year with practically doing a demo of what our year would look like with a mini project at the hub observing disposal processes. It was a very realistic example of what could happen. What we didn't expect at the time we were doing our observations would be of low traffic, and then having to take those observations and analyze them was a little bit painful because of how little data we had. So we started off with the hub, and it was my first taste of field research. It was actually a quite calming experience to sit there and observe people. Maybe it's similar to the idea of people watching that made it feel so intuitive. This prepped me to create the field study plan that was based on the hub practices that we had learned, and then furthermore, the field study report that analyzed the data. In my field study report, one of the hardest things was researcher fatigue. My TA discussed researcher fatigue and how it isn't good to set up sessions right after another, and I didn't take this seriously until I was well into my second session and I was tired. It is something that you need to build yourself up to, and I applaud researchers for. But one of the most enjoyable parts was to see how these patterns emerge over the course of my observations. Taking down observations was like taking down mini story plots of people and being able to freeze that moment. From this field study, I learned that field research is strong and that it allows researchers to gain firsthand experience and knowledge of the situation. But on the other hand, it doesn't allow for the researchers to know why people are doing things, and it's just from their patterns and behavior that are just beyond those coincidences. Field studies contribute to my argument of what user research is by taking a step back and seeing how things are naturally happening. Field research is just that. It is supposed to be unimposing and quiet. This portion pushed me to create the groundwork to the rest of the year and to rid of my assumptions that I had by unbiasedly observing. From that field study report, I had findings that fueled my interview plan, which then developed into the interview top-line report. To prepare for the interviews, I had the field study report to lean on, and for my observations, I had found patterns in backpack traffic, weight dispersion, and pocket usability. I took that into account and tried to paint a picture with the questions I would be asking the participants. One of the hardest parts was creating questions that would give space for interviewees to share what they wanted, but also not assume that they would overshare. I predicted that interviewees had tendencies to undershare, but all of mine overshared and would answer a lot of my questions in one go. And then when I would continue to ask them questions, it just seemed repetitive. This was a good learning experience to create more subject space between questions and leave room for impromptu follow-up questions. One of the most enjoyable parts was just sitting down with people and having that human interaction. Everyone's responses, although might be similar, they were all different in their own way. Sometimes it is easy to forget that these participants are more than just sources of information, but real people with lives and stories. From that interview top-line report, I learned interviews are essential because it gives user a chance to describe their more personal experience. But on the other hand, interviews are also very time-consuming because of the type of data analysis that needs to be done afterwards and the sheer labor. Interviews is important because this is a portion that contributes to my redefinition of user research. It is digging deeper into our own cultural assumptions. This is the tangible step that allows the users to have a platform and speak up about what needs to be changed in their experience in the world now. To prepare for the survey presentation, I reviewed the work I had done in the field study and interview top line. I showed the storyline of how my research findings came about, from seeing patterns and themes in the field observations, to pulling out the relevant ideas that interviewees mentioned in their sessions, to linking it to responses found in the survey. One of the hardest parts about processing the survey was the analysis of data. Since most good survey questions don't include a quantitative answer, organizing responses was time-consuming. In addition, because it wasn't quantitative, seeing correlations took more work but was still very beneficial. The enjoyable part was pulling everything together at the end and creating a presentation out of it all. It was satisfying to see all the work over the quarter that built up to this moment. After the survey, I learned that surveys give a chance to confirm, elaborate, explore, on top of other things on the topic of choice. But also, on the other hand, it is bringing relationships between variables, which can also be very rewarding and difficult at the very same time. Surveys contribute to the big picture of my user research redefinition because it basically validates or confirms all of our findings. From the field study to the interview questions, we have our data and our themes, and to dig deeper into them, but also still make sure they're accurate. It lets us put all the pieces together while checking if we're doing it right. It also opened up the sample pool just because it was easier to send it out and didn't include so much manual labor. The hardest part about this class is the fact that all the work builds on the previous work done. This wasn't ever explicitly explained, and maybe it was just a given, but through this class, one of the hardest things I learned was how much research builds on itself. The field study was built on our hub practices, the interview report was built on the field study, and then the survey presentation was built on all of that, and it was meant to tie it all together. Because of this, there is some pressure in user research because it builds on itself and grows to be this huge thing. This increases the pressure to get it right the first time and makes me scared to make a mistake. But just like how Kristen said in my quiz section, if you miss something the first time, chances are that it'll happen again if it truly is something that is prevalent. Beyond the scope of user research, what I learned was that research should and is the foundation to what our world is. User research is essential to bringing us out of our own bubbles. To be honest, I am not a fan of conducting research, and fleshing out all the details was definitely hard. But I 100% see how it is essential to this world. Even going to Chi was a bit difficult because of all this amazing research was being presented, and yet it did get me excited. Conducting user research isn't for me, but I understand how in the big picture it really is for everyone. Going into this class, I had heard and conducted user research myself, but didn't think much of it. I knew it was vaguely essential and that sometimes you would have to argue for its importance with a superior if they didn't understand it. I understood it as a process with which you would have to go through to understand your user and to make your object more successful for what it was, and that was about it.